Well, today what we're going to do is demonstrate Deming's funnel experiment. All processes vary. When we look at the process and how it varies, what we want to do is we want to interfere with it. Deming used this as an example of how when we interfere with processes, things get worse. It's very simple. We have a little X down here. You take a little marble, you put it into the funnel, and you aim at the X. And you do that, say 100 times. And what will happen is that over that time, you'll get a pattern. And that pattern will look something like this. You'll have all your dots within a circle. And it will vary all over the place. All processes vary. You can imagine like shooting a gun. If you take a gun and even lock it down and shoot it at a target, it'll have that same type of pattern. All right, well, when people look at that variation, they want to change things. There's several ways of doing it. The first way we're going to do is what's called a type 2 error. What we're going to do is we'll drop the ball, and then we'll put a little spot there where it was off. Now we know it's off, and what we're going to do is respond to the last fall. Well, this is the first fall, so we name it the target once again. And this time, now we have two places where the ball dropped. What we do is take the distance that was from here to here and just move the target over so that we will be able to compensate. We'll kind of aim a little bit over to the side and use that last point as our marker. And sure enough, we get a little spot here. Well, then we take this point and go over here. So then we mark over here and shoot there. And soon what you're doing is using the last ball or the last marble that's hitting the surface, and then using that as your reference point. And what happens after about 100 falls? Well, if you take a look at the board, what you'll see is that when we were just dropping it by itself, we had a tight circle. By just using the last point as our reference point, that circle expands. It's about 50% bigger than it was before. All we were doing, though, was changing our behavior based on the last point. Well, what are some examples of that? The most classic example is some people take out a cannon, and they shoot the cannon at a target at the beginning of the day, and they find it's 10 feet off the side of the target. They just move the cannon then so it shoots 10 feet to the other side, and they think they're doing a good job. In fact, what they've done is made their errors worse. Well, how does that involve patient care? Well, a type 2 error would be you get a complaint from somebody. And because of that, you might alter things a bit. You might have just gotten a survey. And again, you just alter it based on that survey. You just adjust things in your schedule because of the previous person. This is a very common type of error, a type 2 error, reacting to the last point of information. All right, once again, we're going to demonstrate another error where we use the target as our reference point. We drop the ball, and in this case, we get a little spot, and then we use the target as our reference, and we would move the same distance from the where the ball hit and the target in the opposite direction. So we'd move it out somewhere over here. So let's see what happens with that. So we would hit that, and whoops, there it goes. All right, so after a while, if you go to the board, here we had a nice tight band. If we just adjust to the target, what happens is it tends to go off in directions into quadrants, something like this. Or it might go in something in a different direction in another quadrant. But it gets farther and farther away from the target. Well, what are some examples of this? This is usually related to supply and demand. I make an impact on one side, but then the demand on the other side is different. A classic example that's used is drug trade. I put in tougher restraints so people cannot bring drugs across the border. What happens? The price of drugs goes up, so people will try harder to get it across. Examples in our practice would be appointments. What happens with that is, oh my gosh, we have a certain amount of patients we need to see, so we adjust things back and forth, and soon what happens is over a period of time, you end up being farther and farther away from your target. The stock market is notorious for doing this type of thing. Farmers do this. They plant a lot of crops. The price of their crops goes down. The next season they price a little. What happens then is there's a huge increase in the price. So we have tweaking, where you use the last piece of information, and then the second is when you use the target. The next method is also used and is very common, but it has the worst results of all. Now, instead of adjusting things to the target or from the last position, what we do is instead of aiming at where we had as our goal, we shoot at what we had as our last target. And we keep moving the funnel to hit our last target. And as you can see, we get farther and farther away from the target. So this is the worst thing possible. What we're ending up doing is shooting at the last target, and what happens is we just keep traveling until finally we reach the Milky Way. And it's off we go. We do this a lot. Some examples of this: train the trainer. You train somebody, that person is trained, they don't get it all, they train someone else. They train someone else, and soon it's off to the Milky Way. Passing down information. Think about how you do management. I tell someone, they tell someone, they tell someone, and then we wonder why the message gets into garbage. Classic is meeting times. You say, well, we'll start at 8, and nobody's there at 8. And so then you start at 8:05. Then it could be 8:10, 8:20, so finally you don't even have to have a meeting because people will be so late. This is called shooting for the Milky Way. So we have 3 things: tweaking, where we use the last piece of information. The second thing, when we adjust to the target or to the goal. And finally, the worst thing, where we just keep following things from the last moment on until you get to the Milky Way. All these things are called tampering. Well-meaning people are trying to add value to the system. They do not. All they do is add complexity, and the system suffers. Tampering. And so we can thank Deming for his funnel experiment and showing us some of the things that we need to know so that we will make our system even better.